Been really looking forward to this session, getting a chance to speak about the new customizing safe guidance. But more than that, getting to partner with Peter, who's really going to share some of his experiences over many years now of what it means to help organizations at scale customize safe to their particular needs. So perhaps with that, Peter, before I get started, it might be nice for you just to say a few introductory words about yourself to the audience today.
Hey, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Pedross. I'm CEO and founder of PEDCO. I'm an SBC since 2011 and an advanced SBC since this year. And we have been involved with our product Applied Safe in applying safe in highly regulated environments. And it was our typical work that we customize safe to the specific contents of those organizations. And today I will talk about our experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And my name's Andrew Sales, the Chief Methodologist here at Scaled Agile. And the way Peter and I are going to organize today's webinar is I'll talk for about 20 minutes, sharing with you some of the new guidance that we have just released actually a few months ago in SAFE around how do you customize the framework to your specific context. And then, of course, Peter's going to go through how to use the Applied Safe product to really scale some of those changes across organizations, particularly in situations where organizations are working inside highly regulated environments. And we'll certainly do our very best to make sure we leave some good time at the end to take any of your questions. Please feel free to put your questions in at any time. We'll keep an eye on the Q&A as we go. So I think with that, Peter, I'll get started. And I put this quote up actually at the recent SAFE Summit in Denver back in September, which was when we actually released the new customizing safe guidance, the topic that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm just going to read this quote back to you because this is really how I think about a framework such as SAFE. And what I said on the day was that an effective framework provides a coherent system of elements. They work together to achieve a specific set of outcomes. And of course, in our world, those outcomes are related to helping organizations really scale lean and agile. But the secret here is that if we can implement these elements in a particular context, that's how we can truly unlock value. And it's this very topic of context and the fact that one organizational context differs to another that led us to put together this guidance on how we can help organizations really customize the framework. And so when I started to look back at how organizations have customized SAFE over the years, because of course, even before we put the guidance together, folks like Peter, many others have been working to customize. It's only now that we've started to bring that guidance so we can share with a wider audience. There tended to be three mechanisms that they were using to really customize. So some organizations were taking what we have in the framework and adapting it to their context. I'm going to show you an example of this in a moment. And those kind of customizations often include things like changes in terminology, changing some of the roles to make them more applicable to the type of work that that organization does. We were also seeing a lot of people who were improving the framework. And this is a great example where we have organizations that were bringing into SAFE practices and ways of working that we didn't yet have as part of our body of knowledge. I'm going to show you an example of that one in a minute also. And then finally, and really exciting, we were seeing that many organizations were extending SAFE. And what I mean by that is they were taking it outside of the primary domain of product development and starting to apply it into other areas. So let's have a look at an example of each one of these three. And a great example of adapting SAFE is what we've seen in the government space most recently. In fact, earlier this year, working with some government agencies, we actually released an update to the leading SAFE class, creating a government-specific version of that course, including, as you can see on the slide here, a government-specific big picture. And even some very small changes, things like talking about mission value rather than business value, things like talking about citizens and public servants instead of customers, being able to speak the language of the organization that is actually adopting the framework is critical to removing any barriers to moving to those new lean and agile ways of working. A really good example that I talked about on stage recently of improving SAFE was the work that was done at the Sao Paulo Treasury. And what was interesting here is that well in advance of us in SAFe incorporating OKRs, objectives and key results, which we have in the framework today, but actually they've only been part of SAFe for a couple of years now. Previous to that, at the Sao Paulo Treasury, they had already improved the framework by bringing OKRs into their day-to-day working. And they'd set up a wonderful cadence, every PI making sure their arts and across the business were aligned with clear objectives, measuring their progress against clear key results, and driving some great improvements in how they were connecting strategy to execution. And then finally, as an example of what it means to really extend SAFe, I really love this example from the Oracle Application Labs, taking the framework, which as I mentioned was designed primarily for product development, and actually applying it to their finance and accounting teams. And you can see on the slide here some of the real successes they had in adapting, extending SAFe into that particular domain and helping them to achieve some real successes, particularly in shortening some of the time to value. So we've been seeing activities like this happen for some time. Organizations successfully customizing the framework. And one question you might be asking is, why is it taking us quite so long before adding this guidance into the framework officially? And I'll talk in a moment more deeply on that topic, but just to give you a bit of a hint now, one of the reasons, of course, is that any time that you customize a framework, you need to be careful that you're not making any changes that actually deplete the value that the entire system can bring. So we always wanted to approach this problem very carefully, but the time now is absolutely right because more and more organizations are looking to folks like Peter and his organization to really help them understand how they can apply SAFe in their context. So I was delighted a couple of months ago to be on stage and be able to present a small but very important change to the big picture. And I hope you've seen this change over the last few months. If you haven't, it'll be there when you next go to the Scaled Agile Framework website. What do I mean when I say that customizing SAFe is foundational? I don't mean that every single organization needs to customize. There are many organizations actually that can get a long way along their transformation journey simply by applying the guidance that exists in the framework. But when I say foundational, what I mean is that the guidance needs to be part of the foundation of the framework to enable those organizations that do need to customize to do it successfully and to do it safely. So of course, as you would expect, alongside the icon, we put out a brand new article. It's live today if you haven't seen it already. You can either navigate to the framework site or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. And I'm going to share with you today an overview of some of the new guidance that's contained in that article. What we were looking to do with that new guidance is really create a process, some repeatable steps that allow you and your organizations to think about potential customizations to the framework, but also hold them up and really understand whether they will change the way you work in terms of positive outcomes, or maybe they'll be the kind of customization that you want to stay away from, because as I mentioned earlier, maybe it will mean that actually the change you make reduces the benefits and the value that can be delivered. We'll talk a bit more about that very shortly. Now, one thing you'll see in the article also is a starting question around when and why do we need to customize the framework? And I put a few things on the slide here. Of course, this is not meant to be an extensive list. And Peter's going to talk very specifically about some of the situations in which he sees the need to customize the framework. But it can be for a myriad of different reasons. It can be that the size of the organization, perhaps it's a small organization, and there are parts of the framework that simply don't apply. It could be a particular industry or vertical. Maybe you're working, like I showed previously, in the government sector. Maybe it's a cyber physical organization. Maybe it's one that actually doesn't produce physical products and they want to adapt SAFe to work better with their services that they deliver. There could be regulatory requirements. We're going to talk a lot about that in the second half of the webinar. Or it could just be that actually you've been on this journey for some time and you've identified some opportunities to improve where you started in terms of your SAFe journey. One thing I will just say very quickly now is that we chose the word customizing very carefully. We see a real difference between customizing and configuring SAFe. There are lots of things in SAFe that you configure, whether it's how you configure your teams to be cross-functional, whether it's how you organize your agile release trains around value, whether it's how you organize your portfolio around value streams. These are all configurations that are part and parcel of what it means to implement SAFe. Customization for us is really about going beyond the defined elements in the framework and changing something fundamental hopefully in all cases to the benefits of your organization. And with that in mind, I think it's important just to reflect briefly on when the right time is to customize. And of course, there's no hard and set rules here, but this slide is trying to encourage you perhaps to wait and to get over that initial implementation of SAFe before you decide to start customizing. Now, that's not always the case. There are some situations like the government example that I mentioned, like some of the examples that Peter's going to share as well, where unless we make the customization at the beginning, we just won't be able to set the framework up in a way that will be applicable in our particular context. But in all other situations, my guidance and recommendation is wait until you've launched an art. Wait till you have a couple of PIs under your belt to really have that hands-on experience of what is working well and what is not working well. And that'll give you the best possible input in terms of the data, the feedback from the teams in areas where we might want to make changes. One of the biggest anti-patterns that I've seen is that organizations will heavily customize SAFe before they begin, not because necessarily they're looking to unlock additional benefits, but perhaps they're looking to make changes that will mean that when they adopt SAFe, they won't quite be changing as much in terms of the ways of working inside their organization. That, of course, can be detrimental to the benefits that we expect to get. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons that we waited quite some time to release this guidance is that we were nervous in some cases about how to put it together in a format that helped organizations customize safely, but also didn't create any misinformation, which led to customizations that would diminish the benefits that we hope SAFe provides. And so to address this particular challenge, the article includes a set of guardrails. There are 4 of these guardrails. I'm going to present them quickly now. And these are there for you to hold up every time you have an opportunity to customize and ask yourself a very simple question. Does this potential change that we want to make to the framework support the guardrails, or does it actually contravene the guardrails? And of course, if it contravenes them, there's an opportunity to ask whether this is the right thing to do. So the first guardrail is perhaps the most important one. Every customization that we make to SAFe, we want it to enhance agility rather than compromise the essence of SAFe. And this guardrail, of course, represents the core values, the Lean Agile mindset, the SAFe principles. And at any time when we have a proposed change in front of us, if we think it will contradict one of those 3 things, it's a great opportunity for us to pause and reflect. The second guardrail also reflects that sometimes we don't customize for the right reasons. So if we have a potential customization, are we doing it because it's absolutely the right thing we should be doing? Maybe it's about changing the way we refer to work items. Maybe it's about changing the roles that we identify on the Agile release train. Maybe it's about changing the PI planning agenda. Are we doing those things because they're the right solution to unlock the benefits that we've identified? Or are we doing them because it's the easiest thing to do in solving a problem that we have in front of us? And sometimes we need to be mindful that the easiest thing to do is not always the right thing to do. And then, of course, and this is a very important guardrail, does the change that we're going to make really give us opportunities to amplify outcomes across the organization? Or is the change being asked because we think it's a way that the organization is looking to maintain the status quo? If we change the word epic to initiative or to project, is that going to help us to deliver additional benefits? Or actually, does it put us in a dangerous position where we might not be forcing ourselves to think very deeply about how we need to change our ways of work? And then finally, just going back to something I mentioned at the beginning, one of the real benefits of SAFe is it provides a system of work. All the elements work systemically to deliver the overall outcome. So be very careful, of course, when you make a potential customization. Is it also going to work systemically? If every single team and Agile release train applied that change, would it hold water? Or actually, is there a change that's being proposed to solve a particular issue for one Agile release train that actually, if we try to roll it out more widely, would start to break and fall apart? So these guardrails act as a real great way to start sensing and testing all the potential changes that you might choose to make. Now, before we look at the process that we put in place to help you go through customizing SAFe, it's worth just reflecting on what are the elements that we might customize. And as we started to look at the framework, it became very evident that all the different elements of the framework tend to fall into these 3 categories. We have people, we have work, and of course we have activities. And that should really come as no surprise. But then what we did is a bit of an exercise to double click on each of these. And out of that exercise, we ended up with these 7 customizable aspects. And when you read the article and start to look at the process that we put in place, it's these 7 aspects that really start acting as your building blocks in thinking about how you can change the framework to fit your particular context. So when you think about that category of people, it breaks down, of course, into particular roles like the RTE, like business owners, but it also includes groups such as agile teams and agile release trains. And these things can be customized in many different ways. It might be the job descriptions, it might be the titles, it might be the people that form these particular groups. And then in terms of the work, of course, we have the work items, the number of different levels, how they're named, the workflows in terms of the steps in the value stream, the continuous delivery pipeline, and also the work artifacts, things like the backlogs, the Kanban boards, and the roadmaps. And finally, within the activities, we have events. Of course, things like PI planning, we have things like the inspect and adapt, and all the team level events and all the portfolio level events. And finally, the practices, things like weighted shortest job first and design thinking as some examples. Now, in the article for each of these 7 aspects, it shares with you the different ways that commonly they are customized. So please, when you have some time, look for an opportunity to dig into that article and understand a little bit more about what's behind each one of these. But with that understanding, what we wanted to put together was a process that would enable organizations and the change agents that are supporting them to go through this customization in a very repeatable way. And this is a very simple 4-step process. You see it on this slide here. On the next slide, you're going to see how we bring this together in what we call a customization blueprint. So we start, of course, by identifying the need. And the needs can come from many different areas. Maybe there are challenges, maybe there are opportunities. Often organizations will run dedicated improvement sessions, or perhaps some things are surfacing from the INA or the team retrospectives. For each one of those needs, we'll have a look at some proposed customizations. How might we change the framework to solve that particular problem or to unlock that particular opportunity? And then, of course, importantly, step 3, how do we validate each customization against the guardrails? Does it support it? In which case, it's a likely good thing to go ahead with. Or does it invalidate it? In which case, we might need to go back to step 2 and think about the proposed change. And then importantly, of course, we want to be really value driven here. So step 4 is all about describing the benefit that this customization we hope will deliver, allowing us to come back and measure and reflect as to whether we really achieve that. Now, in the article, you'll see that we've included a customization blueprint. And you can see it on the screen here. This is a great artifact that you can run in a customization or a customizing safe workshop. So bringing together some of the critical stakeholders, perhaps facilitated by SPCs, members of the LACE, RTEs, identifying, just as I mentioned on the previous slide, what is a particular need. And if you see in this top row here, the need here is to get better at tracking progress against our PI objectives throughout the PI. This organization or this art is really challenged with thinking about how week by week they can make sure if they're in alignment with those PI objectives. As a proposed solution, they've decided to customize a work artifact and replace the PI objectives with OKRs. And you can see the validation that they've done here, reflecting whether this customization, if done locally, would potentially violate guardrail 3. And finally, you can see the benefits that they've identified in terms of improved tracking against key results and clearer alignment with strategic priorities. And there's a couple of other examples that I've half filled out in this blueprint as well. But this blueprint and the steps that surround this really form the foundation of a customizing safe workshop that we hope will be really useful as you start thinking through these potential changes. And then finally, I just want to say something in the last few minutes about what it means then to roll out these changes. Because what you'll also see in the brand new article is some guidance around how do we implement the customization itself. And we talk about 3 steps when we think about implementing. Number 1 is making sure that we're prioritizing the right kind of changes, because likely you're going to end up with multiple potential customizations that you could start addressing. Then we're going to talk about how do we communicate those changes clearly to make sure that people understand why the change is important and how it's going to affect them. And step 3, of course, how do we actually go about rolling them out? So just on that first step, I'm going to bring us back to the 3 stages that I talked about earlier in the presentation. And depending on which stage you're at, whether it's the beginning of the journey, somewhere in the middle, or getting to the more advanced practices, It'll determine the kind of priorities that you're looking for when you start to think about which customizations to begin with. So on the far left, you want to prioritize those things that are really blocking the implementation getting started. The things that if we don't address, we can't even begin on our safe journey. If you're somewhat in the middle of your implementation, of course, we want to prioritize the changes that will improve the success of that implementation, but maybe be careful of the ones that might directly affect the training that people are going through at this particular time. And then, of course, as you get to the more accelerated and advanced stages, we're really looking for those things that will deliver value over a long period of time and help to sustain lean agile ways of working. Now, when you think about how you communicate the changes, we need to be very disciplined here. And I put on this slide a couple of examples of what I think it means to be really clear and provide clarity in these communications. If we're making a change to something like a framework, it's affecting directly the ways that people are working, and it may affect the way that they've just adopted a new way of working. So any change might be met with some questions and some real potential opportunity for you to explain very clearly what is the why. Why, after adopting SAFe for some time potentially, have we decided to make this change to the framework? What is the specific problem that we're solving? How is it going to change? Is it a local change? Is it a change that is compulsory? Is it a change that is optional? Is it going to be rolled out across the tooling that we use? And then the clear timelines. Is this something that we need to complete immediately because it's a barrier and a blocker to success? Or is this something that we're going to roll out over time? And we've included in the article some recommendations for documentation that can really support this type of communication. You're going to see from Peter very, very shortly what it really looks like to manage effective change of this type at scale through proper change logs, versioning, and tracking changes themselves. It's critical. A way for individuals and organizations to understand and be able to navigate to a list of the changes that have been made, why they were made, and when they were made. And also the other one that we see very useful is the one that's in the middle of the slide here, this Rosetta Stone for terminology. If individuals at your organization are attending SAFe training or accessing the SAFe website, but you've made customizations to the terminology that you're using, a single sheet or a website they can go to that does a simple mapping, your terminology to the SAFe terminology becomes really useful for them to understand how to navigate back and forth. And then, of course, finally, thinking about what it means to roll out the changes across any ALM tooling that you might be using. And then the final thing I'll say is how do we roll out the changes? And the recommendation we have here is start small and experiment. It's much harder sometimes to roll back some of these changes, which is why on this slide, the last bullet point for me is one of the nicest questions you can ask. What is the plan to roll back if this change doesn't deliver the benefits we expect? And if it's going to be difficult to roll back, let's design an MVP in a way that we can validate it whilst avoiding that difficulty. Make sure you educate everyone on the change that is coming. And of course, the most important thing is to monitor the outcomes to make sure that some of these changes are delivering the benefits that we expect. So final slide for me. I hope that was a useful introduction to the brand new guidance that we have. As I mentioned, we're going to see now from Peter what it looks like to help organizations through some very significant customizations of the framework. But having this guidance in SAFe, I think, puts in some guardrails now and some processes that we can all benefit from. And a final note is that there's a workshop available today for SPCTs and ASPCs that provides the slides needed to facilitate the process that I talked through, as well as, excitingly, an editable big picture to bring some of those changes to life in your particular organization. So, Peter, I hope that sets you up well for what you're going to talk about. I will stop sharing now, and I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for what you have said. I've done these customization workshops already, and I think it's really, really helpful for what we are doing here and what we're saying. So I will talk about some typical reasons for customizations we see with Applied SAFe. It's based on our main experience with medtech, automotive, insurance, aeronautics, and defense. But nowadays, almost every large organization is somehow under regulation or to have to fulfill some ISO 9001 quality standards and so forth. So it will apply more or less for every company in the world nowadays. Typical reasons we see for customizations is that companies do SAFe in some corner of the organization, some departments, and they want to roll it out for a full organization and they want to secure their transformation based on existing assets because they're doing it since many years. And most of them are working with suppliers, so they want to make sure that they steer the process for each endeavor for the organization and the worldwide suppliers if they talk about solution intent or fully specified and so forth. Most of the case, they also have to prove compliance for an agile organization, and nowadays they also have to make sure that they cope with AI, machine learning, cybersecurity, and so forth. There are a lot of very demanding questions, and there has been an answer for that since many years, since decades, and we talk about quality. Mr. Edwards Deming has been cited very much in the SAFe framework as well, and he talked in the 70s, in the 60s already about customer satisfaction, about defect reduction, compliance, continuous improvement, efficiency, innovation, and so forth. And this sounds very familiar, right? Doesn't it? And there are some questions which we know from the answers from the past, which is having an established quality management system. We all know quality management system from the past, from waterfalls, where we had phases, milestones, artifacts, roles with RACIC, responsible, accountable, supporting roles, and so forth. And we transformed that for lean agile organizations now, so that we have a lean quality management system in place. And such a quality management system for lean agile processes fulfills all the quality attributes which you used to know from normal life cycles, but now we build a solution on compliance incrementally. We build quality and compliance in, we continuously verify and validate, and so forth. What we typically see now in organizations, if we are at there and asked to help them with applied SAFe, is that they have a lot of different descriptions of how they shall work in an organization. So there are some standards over there, some procedures over there, from processes, then they refer to the Scaled Agile Framework website. They have some spreadsheets, Jira probably, and so forth. And for the majority of the practitioners in SAFe, for the developers, it feels like a treasure hunt to find the right answer for their work. And this can be pretty tiresome, and we don't think that developers should go for a treasure hunt. So we would like them to have a harmonized, commonly accepted way of how to do SAFe in a company. And this is applied SAFe, a customizable implementation of SAFe as a lean agile quality management system. This is the entry page of status of applied SAFe, and it's an implementation of SAFe. Consists of all the content in the Scaled Agile framework, and each major version is officially approved by Scaled Agile. What it allows is to accelerate and consolidate the SAFe transformation. It allows to customize and control individually, allow diversity in each endeavors as well, establish and prove compliance if you need it, and finally to learn and innovate as an organization. Now, I talked a lot about various regulations, industry standards, and so forth, like FAA regulations, automotive spice, FDA medical device, functional safety, cybersecurity, and so forth. And they all have varying levels of criticality. They're from safety critical to security critical. But if you look at them on a meta level, they all have very many common fields together. The first thing they want to see is, do you have in your organization somehow described how the people shall work? The way of work is described and known by the people. That's the keyword, established quality management system. If you have that, is it transparent in the execution and in the continuous compliance that you have it? Do you have effective processes? Do you exactly do what you need to do and reduce waste in your endeavors? For example, if we talk about hardware in some of the endeavors in an organization and some have pure software, then we shouldn't talk to them about hardware when they only have to deal with software. Then we have traceability for the processes, but also for the product itself. And then, of course, that verification and validation is based on engineering principles and practices. Nowadays, when we talk to suppliers and we have agile contracting, how is that established and controlled? Now, the first thing I said is quality having a defined process and an established quality management system. It's about having SAFe as a lean quality management system on how to achieve business agility in a regulatory compliant way. And we talked about the upper corner, governance enterprise icon on the left upper corner of the Scaled Agile big picture, the enterprise level. On the enterprise level, this is one of our largest levels of the 5 levels in SAFe. And here we talk about specifically how do you verify your processes, process assessment? How do you define process and how do you manage the improvements? We talked about prioritizations of improvements that must be organized and it must be trained to the people, and you must make sure that you deploy it in a regular way, that you have the versions under control and that you don't jeopardize some endeavors which are already ongoing. So maybe some new arts will start with the newest versions, while some existing arts will remain in the older version of the processes. And we talk also about governance, how you establish governance execution. This is talking about how much decision power you have in your people, in your specific roles. And of course, we have additional roles like in applied, say, for quality manager and process engineers, because that is something that is particularly needed in process engineering as well. We talked about workflows, process and activities, and we called it the what shall be done. So we have also a flow of activities. Each activity has role assigns, responsible, accountable, supporting, consulted, informed roles. They're performed maybe in phases, they have predecessors and successors, and they talk about the inputs and the output work items they have and they hand over. So you have a clear language of how to do things in a company. The second thing is that we say for what you do, but we say how you do it, the practitioners. This is laid out in practices. So we have the example of weighted shortest job first prioritization. We just say, hey, if you want to do prioritization, we have a profound understanding of how this is done, and we could provide it to you, but the practitioner has to decide by themselves if that is applicable for them or not. And of course, practices need to be trained as well, so this is also indicating training needs. So now I would like to talk about some customer examples for extend, adopt, and improve. And this reflects the customizing, which is really a very important activity. Now, if we need to comply, we say we want to be HIPAA compliant or ASPICE compliant or ISO 9001, we can make life very, very easy for ourselves as a process engineer, as responsible for process, and say, hey, we make it easy for ourselves because the goal is the audit or the assessment, and we start defining a process which is more or less reflecting the generic practices, the work products, and so forth. And with that, we are pretty fine and we will get through an audit, but it does bring added value for a company. It's typically a process which will just be laid on the shelf, written once, executed once for the audit, and then forgot. What I think is much, much better for a company is that you say, hey, this is really the way we want to work. We are based on SAFe, it's a SAFe, and we adopt it a little bit. And we take now the various information which we have to comply with industry standards, with regulations and so forth, and we take them as a book of knowledge, something that helps us to have better processes in place. And now we do also a mapping, but this is not a direct mapping. This is more a referential mapping where we start interpreting these practices. So we say, well, this practice X.2, well, this is reflected in the Epic Kanban, and these HIPAA requirements, they're here in the software architecture document, and so forth, and so forth. If you see these colored boxes, we have customers with up to 30, and the most extreme is 220 different standards they have to fulfill. So if they want to do audits every third year for each standard, they do 70 audits a year. So this is really heavy metal what they're doing. And if we have such a mapping, referential mapping, then we get compliant processes. Of course, this is harder to do for the QA department or the process engineers, but it makes much life easier for the developers. Because what we can say to them, forget about compliance, forget about those restrictions which you have, just follow the process and you will be fine. So we can take off that burden of compliance from the shoulders of the practitioners. And then you have to prove for an audit that you stick to a process, and here you can count on the work products which are defined, the work items, count them, put them into a relation, then you have defined derived metrics, and if they indicate that you are behaving well, for example, you could have 5.8 test cases in the per stories in the past endeavors, and that was very good tested, and now you have 6.2, so it indicates that it's tested well enough. Then you have to train the peoples, and then you're fine. So one of an example we see in functional safety, for example, is that we have here the big picture, and we see it less and less that people want to change the items in the big picture. We see, for example, that RT needs to be changed as names, so art flow could be changed to subway or airline, so an airplane. But this is not done that much. But what we see extremely often is that we have the regulations, for example, functional safety, and somewhere in the functional safety it says each endeavor needs to have a project manager. Now you can say, oh my gosh, we need a role of project manager, or you interpret it on a referential way and say, no, in our case, this is the release train engineer, and the ability that he has is to appoint a safety manager. That is an activity which an RT does if it's under functional safety. And then the safety manager can be split as well. So we say, well, we only use that very seldom, so we can put that into a shared service role. Or we say we need it all the time, consistently. So we make sure that a triad of product manager, system architecture, release train engineer is trained with the skills of a safety manager, and they can take over the safety manager role. So we are enhancing the roles or adding additional roles to the SAFE framework, and this is a design decision of how we want to use the framework. Once we have that safety manager in place, he can delegate tasks to the agile teams again. Same is true for phases and milestones. We can look at the various milestones which we have here for the solution level, and we can say, okay, for functional safety, we need additional milestones. For example, safety concept needs to be updated. We need to have a safety plan. We need to have a solution validation here on the right side. So here, we need to have a solution validation. Then we can design, okay, we put those things which we need for the solution validation into solution demo, or we make it explicit with an additional milestones. Again, this is a design principles, which we're gonna adhere to the process. And this is something that we will do in the customization workshop as well. Take the pros and cons against each other. We have some extensions as well. So, for example, if we have various work products on enterprise, portfolio, large solution level, we have strategic themes, epics. Now we can say, okay, to start with an epic in functional safety, we need to have the impact analyzed. We need to have the hazard analysis and the risk analysis done. We need to have the safety concept and so forth. And then we talk about maybe the safety culture. Safety culture is something that we have different variations on different levels. And on portfolio, large solution, our teams, they may be different. So on portfolio, we talk about safety goals, the safety concept. On the large solution, we talk about the technical safety concept. We talk about the system architecture on the art level, and on the team level, we talk about unit tests. So these are all things which are related to each other, and we need to define them very well so that people have an understanding what is expected from them. One larger example which I would like to show is from Skyguide. This is an aerospace organization. They're providing air traffic control systems. They're building them and operating them for civilian and military aircraft. Here's a link for the video. I'm not going to show the video, but you can look it up by yourself if you want to. And what they did is they started 2005. They were existing since the 50s, but 2005 they started to define a proper process engineering. Process management was based on the RUP. And in 2012-13 they started to have an inspired by SAFe and process engineering in place. They got quite some success. They say that is something that is working for them, but they had a problem that they saw that it's fine, but it's not helping to prove safety measures and control mechanisms. It wasn't as efficient as they expected it to be, and they always had discussions on how SAFe is performed, how this new way of working is done. So in 2020, there was a decision by the upper management that they will have SAFe as a target agile operating model, all based on SAFe, and that's where they purchased applied SAFe. So they had already experience of 17 PI cycles at this time. So it was pretty well informed decision to do that. And they did some conceptual decisions as well. They said, we stay as much as possible on the original content of applied SAFe, which is reflecting the standard SAFe, and they only adopt where necessary and enhance with existing context like process activities, roles, work products, and so forth, and make it very explicit that this is standard SAFe content or SkyGuide expected content. And we see here the processes which are taking place on an art level. So we know here PI planning, PI execution, inspect and adopt, and so forth. And what they did is we take these over as they are, and the blue ones, they are a little bit adopted for their needs, and they added a lot of processes which is company specific for air navigation service provider. You must imagine they're providing and updating their services, hardware and software, while hundreds of airplanes are still in the air. So it's a very crucial process if they're deploying new software that this system and these switches is really working. So they had to add those processes to their implementation. And if we take an example of architectural runway building, we see here that some of the content is pure SAFe. So we have here the pure SAFe content as well. We refine architectural runway, PI backlog, and some additional SkyGuide content is here design solution architecture, where we have our own standard operating procedures here. We have a work instruction, we have additional downloads, and we have also a responsible role of the system architect. So we could take over these specific roles which were already existing in SAFe. The same is also for some activities. We had to stabilize and close release. And here we took over the work products which are used in SAFe, but we enhanced it with states. Each work product needs to be reviewed and approved because it is so crucial. So we had some different definition of done, definition of readiness for that, and they had stages as well. And of course, we added specific roles for shared services like operational transition manager and so forth. So we have additional roles. The results we had at SkyGuide is basically when they started from scratch with applied SAFe, after 4 months, they went through the first audit according to the European regulations and law and passed the audit with applied SAFe. They said implementing applied SAFe enabled SkyGuide to significantly reduce the reaction time for changes in their agile processes. And it was enough that a 1.5 hour self-learning for agile release train members was sufficient to learn about the new system. Since 4 years now, they're deploying every 3rd month a new version of SkyArt, their implementation of SAFe for SkyGuide, and this has always been true now. And what they saw is that they achieved cross-department process understanding and simplified workflows significantly. conclusion, I would like to cite here Andrew again. An effective framework provides a coherent system of elements that work together to achieve a specific set of outcomes, and implementing these elements in a particular context is the secret to unlock the value of SAFe. These are some dates which we are backed up by several case studies from our customers. If you have applied SAFe, we accelerate transformations. The feedback was that it's 67% less discussion time needed to interpret SAFe, and for new hires or new assignments, the ramp-up time for new roles is reduced by 2/3. It needs up to 25% less effort needed for SAFe coaching consulting, and of course, because you can build on something that is already implemented, you reuse instead of reinventing the wheel, and this reduces the cost of delay by 2 years. And you can master the complexity of having different implementations and establish the compliance to various regulations as well. Good. I think we are still in time.
Perfect. No, that was fantastic, Peter. And it's great to see some of those examples really bring to life, the challenges that organizations are solving with your support. We got one question straight away and a few others coming in, but please, everyone, we have a little bit of time, just over 10 minutes. Put your questions in the Q&A. Want to make sure we have the opportunity to kind of leverage Peter's experience here. There's one question here, Peter, if you don't mind me asking, just to get your thoughts on to start with. So the specific question is, what is the guidance of customizing SAFe when we'd like to ensure that feature planning includes product security tasks as well? So maybe you can talk a little bit about work breakdown and how to ensure, it sounds like this is a situation where product security is an important part of the development process.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And there's some of the aspects are usually that you put that into the various definition of done's. This is a typical way of how to do it, that you can say, okay, we do it for the features, we do it for the stories definition of done, which are extended with the needs for the security as well. But what I think is a much safer approach is also to say, hey, we have specific increments for team increments, we have system increments, we have solution increments, we have release increments, and have definitions of done's for this as well. And usually we address it also in there that this needs to be done. And then, of course, we implement it also as one of the acceptance criteria of the features or stories that we have that in there as well.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you, Peter. And then another question I've got is, and I know you and I have talked a bit about this, but we've been evolving the framework, of course, over the last 10 or more years. We've had some major revisions. Could you just say a few little things about, the work you do to ensure that applied SAFe alongside the framework? And then also you showed a slide earlier, some organizations will choose to stay on a previous version of SAFe until they decide to move forward. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how applied SAFe manages multiple versions, and a bit of that storyline, because I think that is interesting for people as well.
Okay, very good. And I have a wonderful slide for that, but it's not here. So I
We'll
have to
imagine it.
recreate
We
it.
will imagine it.
Yeah. So I recreated from words. Yeah. It is crucial that we have it on the version control, that we know which version looked when and when was which version used by which endeavor. You have to imagine if you have 3,000 people in a company, 5,000 people in a company, and there are some endeavors, some arts are pretty close to public release. You can't enforce them to go on a new version of the process just because there's a new version available in a company. So you leave them with the older version, and if you start a new art, you will do that immediately. So you have for each endeavor, you have instances, and you can really have for each instance its own version of the process. So this is really something that you need to be able to handle and to roll out. So that's why you have this process deployment, the process for deployment and training in place. And then, of course, we analyze each new version of the Scaled Agile framework If you would print it out, it's about 1,200 pages of content. Sorry for that, but it's really a lot of content in the Scaled Agile framework. And we analyze each content, each page of how it relates and how it reflects in Applied Safe. And then we're going to change it on the right place and mark it as a change for Applied Safe. In the beginning, in the first versions, we saw change rates of up to 60,
Mm.
70% of the content has been changed on each new version. Now we are down to 43, 48% of the content that changes with each new version. Usually it's the text have changed or the picture have changed a slightly bit, but
Yeah.
there's also 10 to 12% usually, which is conceptually totally new in each version. And we have to reflect that as well.
Yeah.
But what we have seen, the grow rate got a little bit down of the Scaled Agile framework. So it's not growing that fast anymore. So we think this is a very good sign because it's a consolidation of the same frameworks. That means for us, it's settled. It's something that is stable and well proven and works. It's a mechanism that functions. And we see that from our metrics.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So a few more questions have come in, Peter, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, Question here from Jürgen. How did you manage the transition phase between the legacy and the applied safe process in terms of audit? So I think you showed a slide where, I think the question is was there a time where they were doing kind of legacy safe out of the box, then they did applied safe, and how did you manage that transition period when you were getting the audits carried out? Maybe from the
Yeah.
Sky Guide example. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a normal case, and of course, the answer is that if you have legacy, you will have already existing documentation. You have already existing products in place that will have documentation. You have existing code, and then if you want to change it with agile manner, you have to define how systems are documented in an environment. Some of the customers, they have products in place in market which their expected lifetime is 20 years. So you have to imagine that the engineer who will update or modify that system in 10, 20 years is in the kindergarten right now. So you have to document for those people as well. So if you have legacy documentation, legacy systems, of course, then you need to make sure how can we change the existing documentation or the existing system in an agile manner. And what we have seen so far is the best to have a skeleton approach where you say that, where you consider each story feature in this particular case as a change request to the system. And you define that every time there's a new story, you have to change the existing documentation for that. And that is true for that particular system, which is the legacy system, until they have a new version of that. There's a full workshop for that for 3 hours where we handle that, but it's a common thing to address, and there are very good solutions for that. It's called the
Yeah,
skeleton.
that's perfect. Thank you, Peter. Question from Henrik around, have you seen any examples in people adapting the yearly budgeting cycle, or making changes to some of the budgeting processes through their use of Applied Safe?
Yes, on portfolio yearly budgeting cycles.
I can say a few things also from my side, just on
Yeah,
this. I mean, when we did the State of Safe survey, Peter, last year, the feedback we got was the biggest challenge, bar none, really, that people were having with adopting Lean and Agile was moving to a more Lean, Agile approach to budgeting. And in SAFE, of course, the encouragement is to move away from the yearly budgeting cycle to something that is more likely twice a year. We see a lot of organizations doing that fairly successfully. I think one of the challenges that organizations face is not necessarily with changing the length of the budgeting cycle. It's more around the actual change of the process from kind of budgeting in terms of funding the people to really moving the conversation to be around how do you fund value streams. and move away from fixing the work through, the budget that you've laid out. Because what we see a lot of the time, and I'm sure you see this as well, is once a project has been budgeted, it's quite hard sometimes to be agile once that project is underway and the expectation is that you'll spend the funds connected to it. In fact, we're doing some work this month. Rebecca and the team is leading an initiative to put out a brand new competency in SAFE around lean agile funding to try and help with some of the challenges that are connected with that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And now I have a good answer to the question as well. We are implementing the Scaled Agile framework, so we are not talking about yearly
Yeah.
budgeting cycles in Applied Safe.
There's one question that's come in, which I'll pick up. It says, for SPCs on the call, what is next? So everything that you've seen in terms of customizing SAFE and the new guidance has been built out as an entire lesson inside the advanced SPC offering that we've put together. So I think you heard Peter mention it at the beginning, but I hope you've seen that recently a 4-day advanced SPC course has been launched into the market, and it covers some great topics, including how to bring AI into the transformation work you're doing, how to really define a transformation strategy and bring that to bear. It also includes the lesson on how to customize SAFE within inside an organization, and then unlocks, of course, the workshop that I showed you if you want to go beyond just the article and start to bring some of those practical assets into yours or the organizations that you're supporting. And then I think, Peter, there's just one last question, and then we'll probably have to close it out. This was a question that said, what would SAFE recommend? What would be the SAFE recommended feature workflow where features flow from design to deployment, but take more time than a PI? And I think this is a great example, if you don't mind me using it, of how we use the blueprint that I put out. An easy solution might be that you extend the length of the PI, but if you hold it up against the guardrails, is it the best solution? So of course, we use the PI as a time box around the features to make sure that we're driving good behavior in terms of forcing us to make our features smaller and looking for opportunities to really improve flow. So in that situation, my guidance would be don't look to adapt the workflow, but look to see whether you can actually think about how to break those work items down smaller so they do fit into your PI. That's an important discipline in terms of making the work nice and small and manageable, ready for incremental delivery. So Peter, I think we've just about come to the end of our time. Why don't I let you say a few final words, and then I'll also say thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for the time. And I think that applying SAFE in cyber-physical systems, in high-regularity systems, is something that works. There are some mechanisms you need to do or to work with. If you use applied SAFE, you can adopt pretty much consistently with such system. There are behaviors here, and with the customizing SAFE practice now, it really helps to get in that way to have SAFE in a compliant way defined. And this is something that really works and helps very well. And it's something that has been proven for the most complex systems in the world. So it's something that really works and is worthwhile to do so.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And I'll also just echo what Peter said. Big thank you for everyone joining today. Hope you get a chance to read the new customizing SAFE guidance. It's great that we can have this kind of vibrant dialogue now about what it means to customize SAFE, built upon all the examples and some of the work that people like Peter have done for many years now. And of course, we're always limited in terms of time, in terms of what we can cover. But if you'd like to dig into these topics, particularly some of the topics that Peter covered, absolutely recommend that you reach out to him. I know, Peter, you'd be more than happy to continue the conversation and get into deeper on some of these topics. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Peter. Hope you had a great session, and hope to speak to you again soon sometime. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you. Bye-bye. I just wrote in the email to reach out.